Hey, it's CrossFit Tracking, just to do a final review for the Garmin Forerunner 245 versus the Polar Ignite, and really evaluating things from a CrossFit workout perspective. Obviously, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you can. We're going to look at it in a few different basic areas of focus. We're going to look at the heart rate sensor, the optical heart rate in comparison to a chest rate strap to see which one has the more accurate heart rate built in. We're going to look at it from a singular workout evaluation. How does it evaluate how much effort you output and calories and impact like that? We're going to look at the recovery evaluation. So after you've done a really hard workout, how long does it project you need to recover before the next big one? We're going to track the long-term load and overall evaluation of how much strain your body has been under over a period of time, looking at how each of them track those metrics. We're going to evaluate the wellness and recovery components, just the health components, whether it's looking at the body battery tracking or the nightly recharge and the Polar, just to see which one gives you a more holistic perspective of what kind of strain and overall health your body is in. We look at the sleep evaluation. Obviously, sleep tracking is a big component these days to see how each of the devices tracks and evaluates your sleep in a purposeful and useful way. We're going to evaluate the apps to see which apps is easiest to use and has the most well comprised or compilation of stats and details, most visibly able to perceive. Look at the weight, design, the feel, the overall just sort of watch basics. Look at the screen quality to see if there's a pros and cons for each different types of screens, as they both use different screen formats. We're going to evaluate the watch functionality just on a day-to-day usage and some of the extra apps and different components for each of the two devices. We're going to look at the battery life to see how they held up over a longer period of time over the last few weeks of testing, and then obviously just look at the cost. When you look for a CrossFit tracking device that doesn't necessarily include all of the high-end topography or maps or climbing metrics or outdoor components that aren't as pertinent to CrossFit tracking. You could say that these two watches sort of summarize the best of what you could get, the best bang for the buck, you could say, for tracking your CrossFit workouts, tracking your load, tracking your health and wellness and those things all around. So this is a big comparison over a number of weeks, just trying to compile all of the details. So I'll try to put it together in a useful format. But again, let's get into it. Okay, so if we get into the watch basics just a little bit, I like to look at things just somewhat from a day in the life if you were going to use each of these watches over the course of the day. So if you take the watches first, obviously you can see the differences in the casing. The Garmin is 42 millimeters across and the Polar is 43 millimeters across. You can see the buttons stand out more pronounced. The Polar has more of a sleek look to it. And if you look at the thickness, the Garmin is 12 point something millimeters and the Polar is 8.5. I think I calculated the Polar is about 30% thinner. And in weights, the Garmin's 38 grams and the Polar's 35 grams. So if you just look at the use, obviously they both use the quick release band so you can switch and change. Looking at the heart rate sensors, you have 9 diodes of green and red. And then on the Garmin, you have the 2 major diodes here, as well as one of them becomes red for pulse ox tracking over your course of your sleep. I don't think I'm going to be able to get it to functionally turn on, but heart rate tracking we'll talk about in just a little bit. Then when it comes to the daily use, typically when you wake up, you look to see what your sleep looks like. You can do that directly in the watch. On the Polar, you would wake up, you push the button, it would be nothing filled around the edges. You push the button, you push the screen once and it would say, are you already awake? And you can see the watch actually has all of the sleep details where you can see your ANS, which is autonomic nervous system recharge, and your sleep charge. It gives you this sleep detail score. But let's look at it on the app. You can't get any of those functions on the Garmin device itself. So if you were to track the differences in sleep, so on Polar, you'll see this compilation of the 2 components, the ANS and the sleep charge. On the ANS, you can get your beat-to-beat intervals as well as your heart rate average, heart rate variability, and breathing rate. So it compiles all those into a plus or minus score on a spectrum, as well as it does for the sleep charge. So it'll ask you how you slept. It'll give you your light, deep, REM, and any interruptions. And then it gives you a sleep score here, which is just functionally useful to give you some sort of idea of what the sleep did for your body. Sleep time, obviously, crazy amount of sleep here, which should be a 100 score. The amount of interruptions, continuity, actual sleep, and then the regeneration levels, so REM and deep. So you get a compilation of these stats relative to your moving average. Sometimes the sleep won't be quite as accurate, because if you had good stats, but you only got 6 hours of sleep, it would give you a same basic, relatively good score, whereas it's not based on the amount of time. So here, if you had a lot of deep sleep because you got 9 hours of sleep, but you had some other interruptions throughout, it would give you a lower score, which isn't quite as accurate. Then you would look at, obviously, the sleep here on the Garmin. You would track it in two ways. I tend to look at how did my body battery regenerate. So this is based on heart rate variability. You can see your stress. So in the blue is when you're regenerating your body's internal resources. So you can see, it builds it over time. So if you get a longer period of sleep, you tend to grow your body battery, your ability to face the next day, your ability to work out. You can see it rising up. So I tend to check my body battery first, actually, because on the sleep tracking, here you can see the same basic stats. It actually had the exact same deep sleep, 1 hour and 4 minutes last night. I think relatively the same amount of REM sleep. So REM sleep, it said it had 2 hours and 0 minutes. Here it said 2 hours and 10 minutes. So they're tracking relatively the same. The thing that I don't like about the Garmin is it does not give you any sort of estimate of value. So it tells you stats. Same thing with pulse ox. You can see how your breathing was throughout the night, which might be beneficial in some way to see if you're having sleep apnea, because there's some sort of low point in the night, as well as your respiration, which obviously the Polar has the respiration as well, but it doesn't translate this information into anything useful. So you have the stages, you have the pulse ox, you can see how much movement you had throughout the night, but it doesn't translate to any kind of score or value. So typically you wake up and you look at those types of things. So you look at the body battery and the sleep to see how you regenerated, and you look at the same things on the Polar, but the Polar just has more details. So you go throughout the day. I tend to watch the body battery to see, as my stress level throughout the day goes, how much it's wearing down my body before I go into a workout. You can, on the Garmin, one of the benefits you'll see or we'll talk about is just the fact that you have these widgets. So you have widgets that measure different things. You can add different aspects to the widgets. But one thing I tend to use is the hydration widget, which you can track. It'll take a second because this just hasn't synced for. You can track your usage of water, which at first I thought this is great. I can track my water, but I don't find myself using it as often. But throughout the day, you can get these stats built into the watch face, and you can track your body battery throughout the day. You might look at other components or other stats to see, like one of the other neat widgets is the sleep tracking. I mean, not the sleep tracking, the weather tracking, so you can see your weather built in. You can see the history of your workouts built in, your calorie burn. One thing that somebody asked about is the calories between the two. I'm finding them to be relatively similar. With the Polar maybe over tracking, but like on a 3,600 calorie burn day, it might say 3,600 on the Polar and 3,300 here. It's not significantly off, as somebody had mentioned to, asked me to check. So you can see a bunch of different things. You have the, little unique apps like the coronavirus tracking, where you can see the basic summary of things. Obviously, it's not very legible because, the font is, it's just more pixelated of a screen, and the black is a little bit, bluish version. But you can, have little widgets, so you have different functionally sort of neat things, and you can add a bunch of different widgets. I just don't choose to. So going through the day on the Polar, I don't find myself using much of the details. I get the nightly recharge. Here you have FitSpark, where it'll actually tell you workout programs that you could try. based on how much you've been working out. And if you did a long, hard workout, it would move into supportive, just giving you mobility type exercises. So that's somewhat useful that it adapts as the day goes on. This is the analog watch version, obviously, which I think in just this watch face is very sleek and simple. It's really professional. And then the activity level. One of the things I'm finding, so on the Garmin, the Garmin has something called intensity minutes, which over the course of a week you have a goal of how much activity you want to have in your day-to-day life. But the intensity minutes are not very well tracked on the 245. On the 945 and the Phoenix 6 series, you could set your exercise level where it would not give you credit for intensity minutes unless you hit a certain heart rate zone, which was more useful. In the 245, you don't have that, and so you actually get credit for intensity minutes that really were not intense. But on the Polar, one thing I'm actually finding useful is this activity level. So the activity level is a compilation of how many steps you've taken that day, how much time you were moving around, how many calories you've burned. So when you've hit a lot of workouts, so I haven't done my workout yet, I'm going to do the United in Movement workout after this video is over, the 7 minutes of burpees over a 6-inch line, bar facing burpees. So I haven't hit it, although I did a 3-mile hike. So I find this to be an actually accurate measure of how much overall output you did in a day. So it includes obviously the workout itself, but just your overall movement. So if I have a sedentary day, it didn't work out, it'll be in the low 30s. So it's pretty spot on to help me evaluate if I had a full day. You have heart rate, last training session, things like that aren't as useful. On both watches, you can pull up your last workouts. On both watches, you can pull up your logbook, which is the series of workouts you've done over a period of days. So let's talk about what would happen next in a day if you go to use one of these for working out. So on the Garmin, I did a video for how you can make your own CrossFit workouts. So basically what I did is in the bottom of you can copy an activity. And once you choose to copy an activity, you can copy the cardio activity, which is built in, just sort of a generic workout, and you can rename it CrossFit. You can change the data screens. So here, I just made a CrossFit, tracking where you have, 4 components of data. On the Polar, you would go into one button press and to start training, and you'd swipe through. I did not like this sort of touchscreen feel of moving through different workouts. So the high intensity interval training is what I would use for the CrossFit workouts. But you can see on the Garmin that you would have a list of workout options. It's just easier to click through. Neither one of these devices does multi-sport, so you can't bind together a few different types of workouts. So you would do the workout on both of these. You can lock the buttons on both. The Polar connects to Bluetooth chest straps. The Garmin connects to Bluetooth and Ant Plus. On the website, CrossFitTracking.com, you can see where I compared the heart rate for a series of workouts compared to a chest straps just on the standalone optical, as well as I compared both of them for most of the load and workout evaluation comparison to a chest strap, where the same H9, Polar H9 chest strap was linked via Bluetooth to the Ignite and via Ant Plus to the Garmin. So it gives me the exact same stats so I can compare the load. When you look at the heart rate, the Garmin was definitely much better heart rate tracking built in on the optical. I would say it was about 92% accurate, or just in the 90s of accuracy. Although it didn't track it exactly, it would get your averages close to right as well as your peak heart rate close to right. It tended to overestimate the beginning part of the workout. The Polar was just not as accurate. I'd say it's probably 60% accurate on just the optical alone. But with any watch you're doing CrossFit tracking, there's a lot of wrist flex. None of these, there's the 2 large grain. I think this one tracks better for my skin type or my coloration, just to have the 2 large grain. They're just brighter than the Polar's, more smaller diodes. So it tended to track better when I used the Garmin versus the Polar. But either way, you want to use a chest strap. You want to go with an old Ant Plus. You can link to a Garmin, which is cheap and it's a little more flush with your skin, or just any of the Bluetooth-based chest straps to get accurate readings when you're doing the flex. So if you look at it from a standpoint of activity, so you can go in and track all your activities, and I think it was like on the 26th, I did 2 different workouts combined together. It was like a Cindy workout with it's called Cindu, it was Cindy with double unders at the end of every round. So I did that, and then I coupled it after a little brief break with a 10-round workout using dumbbells. So it just was a higher output workout. So you can see how the Garmin calculates the effort. And here's the bigger benefit of how Garmin tracks the workout itself. So the stats are going to be all the same, time in the heart rate zones, as well as the picture of the heart rate itself, because I use chest strap compared to both devices. But here you can see the training effect. It gives a simple summary of the aerobic and anaerobic on a scale of 0 to 5. That for me is more useful, both from calculating the type of body impact, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic, as well as just a useful tracking metric itself. You don't really get many other stats. You have to go into 2 pages on the Garmin, so you have to see your calories here. It's a little bit of a tough one. And then one thing that is good about Garmin but bad about Garmin at the same time is you don't see the recovery anywhere in the workout itself. I think on this one it said I had 56 hours I needed to wait. So 2 days, over 2 days, I needed to wait after this workout because it was near the peak, and it felt like it was near the peak. Basically like round 3 of the 10-round workout, which was the second thing I did. I just felt like I just wanted to die. So on the Polar device, you can see it does the evaluation of a workout in a different way. So you have your weeks here, so it's just basically tracking all your workouts throughout a week, and you can just scroll across, and I can hit the 26th and go straight into that workout. Again, with Polar's evaluation, you get this red screen, which is just not as useful because it's just a lot of information. If you're a runner, this red screen goes on forever. And then when they calculate the workout effect or the difficulty, it gives you this score. Basically, anything near 100 is sort of high output. I don't know how high the score goes. You can see here, well, I guess it goes straight into the cardio load, but it gave me a score of 159, but it gave me 5 red dots. And, my own perception of the workout was 5 dots. So it was extremely hard. But as far as evaluating a singular workout, I found this component, this metric, to be not as useful because it was on a relative large scale. It did not tell me, okay, well, 300 is the top end, 200 is the top end, 160 is the top end. It didn't tell you that. It just sort of says this is just, you did a relatively hard workout, but it wasn't based on a fixed scale, which wasn't as useful. So that's what you would see in a basic workout. So again, you can see mountain biking, you get all these stats all in, and you get a bunch more other stats, but you get a lot of stats just all in that same red column, whereas on the Garmin, you get individual stats with a picture reference for each of them. So it's just a little bit more useful. And then when you go into evaluate the load for each, there's 2 ways on the Garmin you would see. So the load is just a statistical measure of how much effort you're putting or how much strain you're putting on your body over a longer period of time. Garmin's I felt like was useful, but not as useful and not as analytically visible as the Polar. And I'll show you the 2 differences. So on the Garmin on the device, this was the least useful. So you see the training status, that's great. One thing to note about the Garmin is you have to run at least a half a mile or at least 5 minutes under GPS a couple of times a week to get the training status to say something. You'll always get your VO2 max and your load history, but to say peaking, rather than saying no status, I just have to run twice. So I typically do a half-mile warm-up a couple times a week. So you go into this, and then this is where it's not as useful because the 245 doesn't have the higher calculations for the type of load. You go into here and there's no data. This is load focused. It's a component of the 945 and the Phoenix 6 series. You go into exercise load. Exercise load is a specific feature to the 245 and 6 series, but it's not disabled here. You have to go deeper into the calculation to be able to see your load over time. The green just represents your optimal training ranges, and the white represents your load over the last 7 days. So still, that's useful, that's okay, but you have to go 2 steps in, and then the VO2 will track over a period of weeks if you want to see it. One thing to note now, I don't know if now is necessarily the best time, but on the VO2 max here, on the Garmin, it's great because you see your VO2 max trend over a period of time. The VO2 max is calculated off that half-mile, 5-minute run, or whatever, run for 5 minutes, or it turns out to be more than a half mile, obviously. But it'll give you your VO2 max. And on the Polar, to get your VO2 max, you actually have to run a VO2 test where you sit still for 3 minutes in the morning. You will get your running index or something like that if you do a longer run, but to get just a simple VO2 max calculation, it's just so much easier, and it's just, it's done automatically with just a brief run on the Garmin. So back to the training load. So that's where you see it here. Now in the Garmin, in the app itself, it's not as useful because you have to go here, and then because it's 245, you have to go here, and then you have to go here to see your range. Well, that's just way too many button presses to get useful information. But if you go into the watch itself, you'll see it is very useful. So I usually have it as the second metric. So you can see here, it just gives you the summary, and then you click into it. It'll give you a chart for the VO2 max, a chart for the training load over the last 7 days on a scale, and then the amount of recovery time. Like I said in the workouts, you don't see a recovery time historically. You can't look at the past workout and say, okay, this generated 56 hours of recovery time, and I'll show you that in the Polar actually in a second. But here in this training status widget, you can see your VO2 max, your training load over a period of days, and the recovery time until you're ready to go back at it hard again. So the load tracking is more useful on the watch itself because it compiles it in those 3 simple formats: VO2 max, training load, and recovery time. It gives you indicators for how fast your different race times would be. So then on the Polar, you see it in a different way. So the first thing, when you look at a workout, and this is sort of deviating from what we're talking about right now, but if you go into Polar, you have to go into Polar Beat, which doesn't make as much sense to me in order to get your recovery time. So we're going to go in last sessions. We're going to look back at that March 26th workout, which was a hard one, and it shows you 1 day, 21 hours. So they were somewhat in line, and this has gotten more accurate as I have worked out more often, where it gives you a little bit more accurate time delay. So sometimes it tends to undershoot, whereas the Garmin might say 20 hours, this will say 9. But on the more intense workouts, it does tend to, well, there's another 9, 7. It just tends to undershoot. You can still get it, and obviously with that really hard workout, it did give a relatively accurate longer period of time that I needed to rest before I start another more intense workout. But that's how you track the recovery time. So that's the basic recovery features built in. But looking back at the load, so you go into the main drop-in screen, you go into your training, you can see your training over the course of a week. But to access your cardio load, it's this function here. And it'll show you your cardio load over a period of time. So like this was yesterday, bike ride plus the CrossFit Support Your Box 10-minute workout with some warm-up in there. So it'll give you an assessment of strain, which is your 7-day load, for example, and the tolerance is your 28-day relative fitness level. And then the 38 is just what that amount of workout strain, put on your muscles itself or put on your body. So you go here and you can go into the total tracking, which is what I really like about the load tracking here. You can see your workouts over time, but this is where it accumulates. So the 2 yesterday, it gives you a cardio load. Now that's the biking and the 10-minute Support Your Box workout. And the total strain of 69, the tolerance built up to 67. So as you work out over time, your tolerance builds. That means your fitness. It's a tracking measure of your fitness. And so if you go back to like the 26th, that had a cardio load, which is that same score in the Trimp, score for the workout evaluation of 159, and then the 82 is the overall strain, looking at it on average across the last 7 days, and the 65 is what I built my fitness level up to be. So you can see where if you're tracking over and under, see here, I'm so far today tracking under until I go do the CrossFit workout just in a little bit. But this to me is a better, useful, tracking over a period of time of your load on your body, and it gives you the stats that goes into calculating it. So basically, if in general your strain is over your tolerance, your 7-day strain is over the tolerance, which is your 28-day fitness level, then you are continuing to grow. If you have a point like right here where your strain is below your tolerance, then you'll start to go into a detraining phase. And then if you did nothing over the period of time, you would go into more significant detraining. So the load is a little bit more visually useful, so you can see it over a period of times, but the best is the chart itself where you can see it, visually across a period of time. So that's how you track a workout. And that's how you look at the load over a period of time. And those are the two most functionally useful aspects of, tracking either of the devices. One of the things when you look at tracking the devices and you look at what they would, how they would affect your day is obviously it's going to be battery life. So tracking the battery life of each, I'm finding the Garmin to burn between 15 and 18% just doing a 1-hour workout with no GPS, no music. 15 to 18% a day burn. And the Polar 24 to 25%, obviously it has a brighter screen. If you listen to music on the Garmin, let's say hypothetically like an hour's worth of music or an hour-long workout where you're linking it to music, it'll burn between 30 and 33%. And if you have GPS and music for, let's say, roughly an hour, it'll burn 35 to 40% of the battery life in 1 day of usage, not just in the 1 hour, but in 1 day, with that being a part of the day. On the Polar, if you actually turn the screen on, so if you go into a workout, you can swipe down, you can lock it in the swipe down, as well as you can turn the screen on to stay permanently on while you're working out. It'll burn considerably more. So let's say about 40% over the course of the day. And if you do GPS and the screen on for that GPS workout, it'll burn about 50%. So here, you have a lot more burn rate if you go into each of the different components that you have available to you. So battery life on both, you'll get about 5 days on the Garmin just with generic usage, no significant GPS, no music, and on the Polar you'll get about 4 days, 3 to 4 days. So they both charge relatively quickly, so it's not really a problem. But just be aware of some of those battery components. So looking at it over the course of time. So those are the main aspects you would use it for the day. The overall rest of the day, you might use some of it for different purposes. So, here I might track you have to do a deliberate press because I have a screen protector on there. I might track the activity. I might leave it on this watch face for the day. But on the Garmin, you might track a bunch of different things. So I will tend to go and look at my burn rate on my body battery, and I'll tend to look at maybe some other things, like look at a widget or two, like the weather widget, just to get an idea of what the weather's going to be like. So with the Garmin, you'll use some other functional things throughout the day. And with the Polar, I tend just to look at a few basic stats that comes on one of the primary watch face screens. So that's basically the summary of what you might use outside of workouts, outside of load tracking, outside of the basic fitness level type things. You might track those types of things throughout the rest of the day. On the Polar, you might actually go into here. So once I do the CrossFit workout, it'll switch over to supportive, which would be this right top area, and give me a mobility workout. So I could go in and do something that's mobility based just to finish out the day. But looking at the two, that would be where you go from where you wake up in the morning to what you might use throughout the day, to a workout itself, to evaluating the workout, to evaluating the load, and then other useful things you might do. Both of them get text messages. One thing before I forget, the screen on here is beautiful, but I'm having a problem with the wrist raise gesture. So a lot of times you go to lift your wrist and you can't see a notification unless you lift your wrist. So it doesn't automatically appear. I'm having to deliberately lift my wrist, and obviously there's a second delay, but it doesn't always just pop up. It's nice on the Garmin that, no matter what you're doing, if you don't do anything, the notification will just appear on the screen and you can glance down at it. You won't have a backlight unless you do the wrist raise, but either way, you'll get that. You'll get the ability to read whatever the notification is. They're both tracking just that. That seems to be fine. I'm getting a buzz, like a vibration buzz on both. They both have alarms. The Garmin has, multiple alarms you can set at different times of the day. The Polar, you can only do one alarm, but they both allow for weekday alarms. Everything's relatively the same there. And, overall, there's different pros and cons. So let's get into a summary of what I liked about each of them. So looking at all the different components and how you sort of evaluate a day in the life of using either of these devices, it is hard to say if there's an overall winner. They both track different aspects and in different ways. It's almost like you wish they could pull different benefits and features from each of the different devices to make more of a perfect device. If you look at those basic things said we were going to track, the heart rate sensor, single workout evaluation, single workout recovery evaluation, long-term load, overall wellness, health, sleep evaluation, app use, weight design feel, screen quality, watch functionality, battery life, and cost. Each of them have ones that they were best at. So the Garmin was definitely best in the heart rate sensor, single workout evaluation, looking at the anaerobic and aerobic impact on your body and somewhat of a useful 0 to 5 scale. Single workout recovery evaluation, that you could see the recovery tracking, as well as you can get that recovery tracking to be a data component on the watch face itself. The app was easiest to use, and I felt like it compiled all the stats in a more useful or visually functional way. And watch functionality, obviously it just functions better as a smartwatch and expandabilities with widgets. On the Polar side, I felt like their load evaluation, looking over a longer term trend where they calculate strain and tolerance and how you're continually building your tolerance level to handle the workout, and it's evaluating the strain relative to that over a prolonged period of time, plus the way that they put together the chart over a number of days and weeks was very useful, and you could see your span of time over a long period of time. The sleep evaluation was best on the Polar, just the nightly recharge, looking at the autonomic nervous system recharge, as well as giving you a sleep score and all the different components of the sleep and having it make purposeful sense. And then obviously the cost structure of the Polar was best. They came into an overall tie into a few main areas, the overall load, the overall wellness and recovery, the features of all those things tied together. The screen quality was pros and cons on both sides. So the screen quality of the Ignite was obviously visually beautiful and brilliant. The colors were rich, the blacks were black. It was great in that component, but there was a problem with the wrist raise. So you can't always get the screen usage because, just a little bit of a problem getting the screen to turn on when you lift your wrist. And then obviously on the Garmin side, a little bit of the bluish black version of the screen, but the quality to be able to see it in daylight, as well as just being able to use it functionally all the time, it being always on. Screen quality was sort of a tie there. The battery life was relatively a tie. They actually held up relatively the same. Obviously, if you left the Polar, if you locked the screen to be on all the time in a workout, it would burn more battery. And if you used the Garmin for music capabilities, it would burn more battery. And then obviously both of them with using GPS would burn similar battery life. So the battery life was relatively similar. If I looked at it from things that I used on a day-to-day basis, things that I liked for each device, things that I didn't like for each device. For Garmin, there were 7 things that I liked, 12 things, so 7 on the fitness and wellness, 12 things just overall that I liked about the watch, and then 7 that I didn't like as much or didn't find as useful. On the Polar, there were 11 things I liked and 6 things that I didn't like, so somewhat of a tie there. Looking at it now going forward, it's actually tough to say which one I can go without, because I've grown now that I've worn them on both wrists for a month now. I've grown to like different pieces of each of them, and it's going to be hard to lose like the nightly recharge. I think for me, I might lean towards the Garmin 245 because it's more customizable. The widgets provide a little bit more benefit. I do like the workout evaluation. The load is okay, but I'm going to miss the side on the Polar to be able to track the load trends over a period of time, as well as obviously just the visual, capabilities of the screen. The music I ended up using a little bit on the Garmin, as I mentioned. So it's really tough to say which one is the best. I do think that both of these, obviously the cost of the Garmin's $350 if you have the music, and the cost of the Polar is $229, and most times, like right now, you can get it for $179. So it's a very inexpensive, affordable, visually beautiful watch, and well designed on the casing, things like that. So I probably will lean a little bit towards Garmin. I'm gonna have to decide over the next few days which I'm gonna wear as the daily driver, because both of them provide benefits that I really like. So that's the summary of the 245, Garmin Forerunner 245 versus the Polar Ignite. They're both awesome watches. They both do a very effective job at evaluating your CrossFit training, your CrossFit development, your overall fitness development, and provide definite benefits for health and wellness, things like that. So leave me a comment if you have more questions. I know it puts it in a little bit harder decision process when you can't decide between the two. Obviously, subscribe. We're going to continue to track new things. I'm looking forward to tracking or testing the Coros Apex Pro. That's going to come up next, and I'm hoping that that's going to be another contender for best CrossFit watch. Again, CrossFitTracking.com. Thanks so much for watching.